سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم إلى نور الفهم وأكرمنا بمعرفة العلم وزين أخلاقنا بالحلم يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين آمين. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. Start with dua. It's a very blessed day. Of course, Jumu'ah had just finished and Maghrib just came in. And as we always mention, the angels of the day and night interchange at the times of Fajr and Maghrib. They write down and record everything that we've done during our day. And as the angels of the night come in, they'll write everything that happens during our night. As the Prophet ﷺ said, يَتَعَاقَبُونَ فِيكُمْ مَلَائِكَةٌ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. So this is a very blessed hour. So we'll start with dua and we'll say اللهم لك الحمد كله ولك الشكر كله لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت سبحانك كما أثنيت على نفسك. اللهم صل وسلم على حبيبك وعبدك المختار سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم اغفر لنا ما قدمنا وما أخرنا وما أسررنا وما أعلنا وما أسرفنا وما أنت أعلم به منا. اللهم ربنا بارك لنا في أعمارنا وأعمالنا وأرزاقنا وأهلنا وذوينا وأحبابنا. اللهم اجعل لنا من كل ضيق مخرجا ومن كل هم فرجا واجعل لنا من بعد العسر يسرا. اللهم دبر لنا فإننا لا نحسن التدبير وقدر لنا فإننا لا نحسن التقدير. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من عبادك الراشدين. O Allah, we call upon you, we pray to you, we beseech you, we ask you by your names and attributes that you bless our lives and our livelihood and our actions and our families, and that you instill within us strong faith and make us steadfast upon the right path. O Allah, fill our hearts with your abundant mercy and fill our homes with your abundant mercy. Guide us to your pleasure. Make us of those who strive for your pleasure. And O Allah, we ask you by your names and attributes in this blessed hour that you relieve all those facing difficulty, whatever that difficulty may be. We ask you to be with them and to aid them and assist them. And we ask you, O Allah, to reward those afflicted with trials for patience in their trials. O Allah, we ask you to be with those who are ill and sick from the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, to grant them healing. And we ask you to have mercy upon those who passed away from the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We ask you to make the best of our actions, the last of our actions, the best of our days, the day that we meet you and you are pleased with us. O Allah, forgive us what we've put forth and what we've delayed, what we've concealed and what we've made public, and forgive us our transgressions against our souls. O Allah, we ask you to make us in the day, in your shade, the day that there's no shade but your shade, and to bless us to drink from the palms of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, drink that will never feel thirst thereafter. Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Amma ba'd, jazakumullah khair for attending the Friday Forum, our weekly Friday night program where we discuss current issues through an Islamic lens, as we usually do it in an interactive discussion format. The topic for tonight, as we mentioned, is gender interaction. Where do you draw the line? And this was actually as a result from polling from those people who are registered to the WhatsApp group for the Friday Forum. We put a few different subjects and this one got the most votes. So hopefully it's a subject that concerns people and people are interested in. So we'll do our best to address the details in it. But before we start, I'll pass over to Akhi Ahmed if there's any announcements of upcoming programs or anything else, inshallah.
Okay, jazakallah khair, Shaykh. So yeah, I did just want to remind people for Saturday, August 27th, which is not tomorrow but the week after, we're having the summer festival out here in the back here from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. If you went to it, it's going to be analogous to the one that was last fall, the fall festival. There's going to be a variety of vendors, activities. It's for the whole family. Bring young kids. It's good for adults and couples, everything. And then there's also the event, the 114 event, where it's a challenge event where it's blending spiritual and physical challenge. Spiritual, it's a Quran memorization challenge, and physical challenge, it's a running marathon challenge, and there's various levels of it. It's going to be at Saddle River County Park, and that'll be in later September, but you should sign up now at 114, that's ONE 14.1. ONE14.1. You can see in the ICPC weekly emails, you can see the flyer for it to get the link if you didn't get that. I think that was all into announcements, Sheikh.
I think there's one more too, We gave a khutbah today about the subject of disability, the stigma behind disability. And that was because we have guests from Muhsin, which is a national organization that deals with, or that supports, I should say, people with disabilities in our Muslim communities and families with special needs children. So we have them coming at ICPC Patterson tomorrow, and it's at 6 p.m. It's really important that we support this type of cause, that we promote it in our community. It is something that's unique among masajid. There are a few masajid that are emerging, that are really trying to accommodate and give access to those with special needs children. So this is something that we want to grow and develop more. So please be there tomorrow at 6 p.m. Jazakumullah khair.
So with that, I think we can get started. I guess it's the first question.
Inshallah.
Okay.
I think just as you guys see here, the number as usual, this is my Google Voice number. We want to try to make this session interactive. The whole idea is we want to hear from people. What are you going through? What are you dealing with? What are your questions and your comments, your feedback? Please share that to this number. And as we're discussing, Brother Ahmed will mention whatever you guys send, inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay, so with that, Shaykh, can we start by framing why you think this is an important topic and how you feel that you should want to frame the topic in general?
Sure, absolutely. This subject is a very complicated subject. The subject of gender and gender interaction, and when you have mixed gender settings, and why is it difficult and complicated? It's something to reflect on for a moment. You know, of course, when it comes to people and their cultures and their social norms, it's not a monolith. What do I mean by monolith? Of course, you'll have people with different cultures from all over. People with cultures that are a little more conservative and others that are a little more liberal. And when it comes to these types of issues in Islam, there are certain things that are clear-cut, and then there are other things that are left for the cultures of people to sort of fill in. Not everything in Islam is spelled out, but what Islam does give us is it gives us the general guidelines. And that's really important to understand. So I guess, Akhi Ahmed, when we're talking about this subject, it's complex because, in previous times and pre-modern times, you would not find much controversy arising about these issues because each person in their own locality and their own country would have their own values and their own, social customs and realities that they've generally accepted that people really don't push back against. But what we have as Muslims here in the West is a very big melting pot. People coming from all walks of life, and many Muslims confused about their identity between the culture of what's back home, if they have a back home, and what they're growing up learning in our country, which is generally pushed by progressive liberal values. So it becomes a little confusing and a little blurred. What do I have to do, and what is sort of left as an option, as a difference in flavor in the customs and cultures of people? So I think that's a big part of this discussion. And I hope everyone realizes that. There are certain universals, guidelines that Islam has given me, certain advice that my deen has set forth for me. And then you're always going to find in the end of the day, people who are a little bit more conservative and people who are a little bit more liberal in their application of that. That was even the case in pre-modern times in terms of understanding and interpreting in texts. But there are certain things that are just not acceptable in terms of our deen and our principles and values, and other things that are sort of not as clear cut. So that's why the subject's a little bit complicated, because you have to deal with it in a reality where, I guess that's very much more open and much more diverse. So I guess that's for starters. A few things I would hope to address, and I want to hear from you guys, is what are the etiquettes that Islam teaches when you have a mixed gender setting? Are there certain etiquettes that need to be followed? All right, when it comes to dealing with the opposite gender, are there supposed to be certain boundaries? Must there be boundaries? If the answer is yes, why? Why does there need to be boundaries? And another follow-up to that, some people might ask, well, why does it matter to anybody else? This is my choice. What do my personal choices have to do with anyone else? Shouldn't I be able to choose for myself, right? So that's another point of reflection. You know, this subject actually opens up other things too. The concept of hayat, modesty. What is it in Islam? What does it entail? Are all relationships the same? You know, even when we're dealing as brothers among each other, is everything fair game? Or sisters among each other, is everything fair game? Are there certain boundaries in terms of what I expose to the same gender, you know, in my dealings with them? So that's another line of talking. The concept of awra. What does the word awra? You guys know what awra means, right? Anyone know what awra means? You guys know what awra means? What does it mean? Raise your hand. Awra is awra. This is circular. فيه دور. What does awra mean? What does it refer to in English? Tell me in English, what does it refer to? It refers to the private area, right? That which is supposed to be kept private, right? That which is supposed to be kept private is the awra, right? What's the origin of the word? That's a little telling about Islam's philosophy on exposing beauty to different people, exposing the beauty of the body to other people, whether it's a guy to other males or to females, or a sister to other females or to males. So that's one line of discussion. Hayat, one. Awra, two. Are all relationships the same? Why does there need to be boundaries? You know what? What's happening in society today? What does it teach us? This is where I really, really want to hear from people, you know, because many of the people here perhaps that are still in college, they are regularly in situations where they're dealing with the opposite gender in their MSAs or the college campuses, just in their classrooms, or as colleagues in work, or as neighbors. What are the boundaries? Are there boundaries? You know, what happens when we don't have boundaries? What do the stories of life tell us about those types of situations? A lot of important things to reflect on. That's the general framing, a bunch of questions that's supposed to sort of set the tone for this type of discussion. Again, but Allah, that's what I would say as starters, Akhi Ahmed, and if you have anything you'd like to add in there or ask, then feel free.
No, Jazakallah khair. I think we can. I think that frames it to start discussion. So, I mean, I guess the first step is what should be covered from an outer perspective, and I guess just for the time being, let's look at it from the man and woman instead of getting into the complications of same gender. But to stay basic for a second. So, the first level is what is basic private parts that should be kept private from the opposite gender in the first place. And then I guess then the next level is then once you do that, then what are the boundaries to be? So I guess skipping past what should be covered in the private parts, we can maybe work backwards to that.
Okay.
Assuming that we've agreed on some level of private parts that should be kept between the genders. I think there's, yeah, like you said, I think there's a broad school of thought on this, especially considering we're here mixed in the West versus coming from other cultures historically. Some, you know, you hear from a lot of Muslims, they say, okay, once you cover the awra, then all interaction is okay at that point. Could you maybe touch upon that philosophy? If assuming that you are covering well and everything, then at that point, should there be boundaries?
Jazakallah khair. I hope not everything's okay after you cover your awra. But anyway, should there be boundaries is a good question, and I like starting at that, working back towards what's the awra. Should there be boundaries? Now, here's something really important to keep in mind. When it comes to gender interaction, our deen teaches us that there should be a level of seriousness to the interaction with the opposite gender. Level of seriousness doesn't mean being mean or being cold or not being courteous or kind or not saying salam or something of the sort, but there should be a level of seriousness when interacting with the opposite gender. And the reason for that is because we're human beings. When certain feelings begin to develop, when there's no boundaries, it could be very dangerous and destructive to people, whether they're married or not, by the way. It happens whether they're married or not, whether they're young or they're old. Islam sets forth for us an example. When you're interacting with the opposite gender, there needs to be some seriousness to the interaction. And that's because if there isn't, then we're talking about perhaps lines being crossed. And Islam doesn't want that. There needs to be a need for me to interact. That's number two. That's a really important one. There needs to be a need for me to interact, and that need needs to be left at that. What does it mean there needs to be a need? Now, there was an interesting video, and this video was done by non-Muslims. I've mentioned this in some of my lectures before. Can men and women just be friends, right? Can men and women just be friends? That was the question of the video.
And I'll just add to, someone from the audience had already asked that question as their first question. Can there be such a thing as friends? So it's on the mind, inshallah, of the audience as well.
So can men and women just be friends? What do you guys think? Okay, the guys spoke loudly. What about the sisters? Can men and women just be friends? Suhab, yani. Can they be friends? No? Go drink coffee with each other, go have lunch, is that okay? Does anyone say yes? Anyone say yes? You say yes? No? Okay, you're saying no. Okay. So that tells a lot. You know, we're, as beings, we have emotions, right? Whether you're a guy or you're a girl, you have emotions, right? There are emotions there. When the basis of interaction is not need, then what's going to happen? You know, you're going to find that the smiles might turn to laughs, the laughs will turn to jokes, and the jokes will lead to some type of emotional connection, and that will lead to excessive messaging or talking, and that might lead down a rabbit hole. And you know what, some people might say, well, you know what, we're adults, and I can control myself, and that doesn't really apply to me. Why should I need to function based on that if that doesn't really relate to me as a person? I know how to control myself. I know I won't cross the line with sister so-and-so or brother so-and-so. The answer to that is Islam set general principles. And those principles are meant to guide society. Society as a whole, not as individuals. Right? They have a principle in Islamic law. They say, النادر لا حكم له. إنما حكمه حكم الغالب. We don't give special rulings to rare circumstances where, and even that rare circumstance is really questionable, because how many times has a person thought that they can quote unquote control themselves, and they find themselves doing things or falling into things that they really can't take back, that cause a lot of damage. That's why it's general principles that are meant to guide society. Allah Azza wa Jal makes it very clear that my personal choices matter to you and matter to you. Your personal choices matter to me. Why? Why should my personal choices matter to anybody else? Because there's a two-way relationship between society and the individual. We as individuals make society, and society is supposed to help better us. That's the two-way relationship. So when indecency, and you know there's a verse in the Quran, it's really scary, Akhi Ahmad. It says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يُحِبُّونَ أَن تَشِيعَ الْفَاحِشَةَ فِي الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. This verse is about the ruling of the proliferation of indecency. Yeah. You can't just do whatever you want if it's just on your personal level, not for anyone's sake, but for the sake of yourself and for the sake of society. Because my choices might have detrimental consequences on society. This verse is speaking that when indecency is left or to people to do with it whatever they want and expose it however they want, then that's going to ruin society as a whole. You know, the subject that we're dealing with, gender interaction, relates to one of the 5 greater objectives of Islamic law. Yeah, how many of you have heard of the greater objectives of Islamic law? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Anyone has heard of it?
I haven't heard of them.
You haven't heard of them?
No.
All right, for someone who has heard of them, what are one of them? The الكليات الخمس للشريعة الإسلامية. What's one of them? Anyone know? حفظ النفس. حفظ النفس. Preservation of life is one of them, but before it is something else. Preservation of faith. Preservation of faith, preservation of life, and preservation of mind. حفظ العقل. Right? Preservation of mind. Another one is حفظ المال, preservation of wealth and personal properties. And then the last one is حفظ العرض. حفظ العرض, preservation of honor. These are the 5 greater objectives of Islamic law. Now, when it comes to this last one, what does it mean, preservation of honor? It means I don't put myself in questionable circumstances. I don't allow that for myself. Why? Why? Because does reputation matter? So there's a few different aspects to this. This is a controversial question. I know some people might have knee-jerk reactions to this type of question. Does reputation matter? Does reputation matter? What do you guys think? I want to hear answers. If you think it matters, then tell me why. Someone tell me why. Why does reputation matter? If you don't have a, so does people, what people think of me and people say about me matter? Should I care about that? Yes. I should care about that, right? And you should deal with it in a positive way that people respect you, as our brother is saying. Exactly. Jazakallah khair. Who says it doesn't matter? What people say and think of me doesn't matter at all. You say that? Are you willing to say why? I should just care about what Allah thinks of me, right? This is a very common sentiment that we hear expressed. But however, there's a hadith that teaches us something. It's different when you're driven by doing things for the sake of people. You're disingenuous, you're being fake. What are the people going to say? Of course, this thought has caused so much damage to people because, oh, what are the people going to say? We need to avoid this because people are going to criticize us. And it's baseless stuff. And I totally get that. However, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that tells us the following. The Prophet ﷺ was walking one time in the dark and he was talking to his wife Safiya. And 2 of the Ansar passed by, and when they saw the scene, they began to hurry away. The Prophet ﷺ told them, "Ala rislikuma." Hold it right there. Don't rush away. Ana Rasulullah wa hadhihi zawjati Safiya. I'm the Prophet and this is my wife Safiya. So then they said, Subhanallah, Ya Rasulullah, afika nashuk? Are we really going to doubt you, O Prophet of Allah? Why would you tell us this? Why would you take the time to correct our potential misunderstanding of what we're seeing in the darkness of night? The Prophet ﷺ said, لكن الشيطان يجري من ابن آدم مجرى الدم. The shaitan traverses the son of Adam's body like blood flows through the body. Meaning that the shaitan is very, very much present in influencing the perceptions of others. You know what? When people assume wrongly of me, and I know that, that's damaging for them. And I don't want that for people. So, in that sense, let's go back to what we were talking about, حفظ العرض. When it comes to preservation of honor, my deen wants me to make the right choice because it's the right choice. And because if I don't make those right choices when it comes to interacting with the opposite gender, it'll have a negative impact on society as a whole. And that matters to me. I don't want society to be corrupted. Right? So that's where we're going so far, if that makes any sense to you in this discussion. You know, so what did we say so far? We said two things about when it comes to dealing with the opposite gender. Do you guys remember? I know we said a lot. First, it needs to be what? You guys remember, anyone? There needs to be a level of seriousness. The second thing, what is it? What is it? No friends? Inshallah, you could have some friends, but no, the second thing is, there needs to be a need for me to interact with the opposite gender. And I should limit it to that need. And that's really important to keep in mind, because I'll tell you, I've heard too many stories. Yes, there has to be a valid need. Yes, a justifiable need. I've heard too many stories where you'll find that a brother and sister started off in a serious place, in a good place, but the shaitan got the best of them and it ended up becoming into an illicit relationship, and they did something haram. They did something awful with each other that they should only do in the framework of marriage, right? In the framework of marriage with each other. And I've heard of too many scenarios where sometimes the brother and sister actually are doing it for the right purpose, right? They're doing it for the right purpose, which is for marriage, but they're in haste a little bit. They're not even engaged yet. They're just getting to know each other. But they call it, what do they call that? Infatuated. They get infatuated with the person they're interacting with, and instead of talking to each other once a week, it becomes every single day, messages whenever. And then all of a sudden, what happens a few months down the line, when things don't work out, it causes so much pain to either side, because there was a huge emotional attachment built where there wasn't supposed to be a huge emotional attachment. Too many stories like this, brothers and sisters. Please, raise your hand, brother. Raise your hand. Jazakallah khair. Allah yabarak feek. Tfaddal. موضوع التبني موضوع ثاني خالص. The تبني adoption is a completely different subject. But you know, let's not get into that because it's going to cause some confusion. The subject of adoption is prohibited in a very certain context. When you disconnect the person from their forefathers, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Except in a very secondary way. Sometimes when you'll find, sometimes it happens with family. Here, this is how it has to do with it. I could totally see what you're saying. When you're talking about family, sometimes brother-in-laws, sister-in-laws, right? Oh, okay, we're just family now. We're like brothers, we're like siblings, right? So you'll find that maybe the brother-in-law will become extra friendly with his brother's wife, or vice versa. And the Prophet ﷺ said, be very careful of this, al-hamul maut. Sometimes it'll lead people to be too comfortable at home, not imagining that some boundary could possibly be crossed, you know, that perhaps there would be khulwa. And this is the third thing, add it to your list. The third thing, when it comes to gender interaction, there cannot be any element of khulwa, which is utter isolation with the opposite gender. Because, again, going back to our human nature, our ghariza, our emotional state, you know, sometimes you find good people would fall into certain mistakes, and this sometimes happens in families. It happens between in-laws, it happens between perhaps siblings who aren't really blood brothers, blood brother and blood sister, and this is something that, so there needs to be those boundaries. Those are three things I mentioned so far. The seriousness, there needs to be a need, and we should avoid khulwa and isolation at all costs. Right? And there's a lot to talk about in that regard. But you know what? There's something here. Some people think, well, if I'm in a public place, you know, we're at a coffee shop or a store, and there's tons of people around us, well, there's not really khulwa. There's no isolation, so it's okay. You know, why would that be problematic? And the reason why that's problematic is because those people, you're having a private conversation that is really exclusive to you and that other person. Those other people in that coffee shop, they probably don't even hear or don't even have the care or concern to really cause you to feel formal in the interaction. So that's a very, very slippery slope. You know, I don't know if we're getting any questions.
We're getting a lot to it. I just think so to frame here too. So I think we got to the idea of a starting point of like what the boundaries might be. I think a framework. I'm sure you would say you can go deeper into them, but I think that's an overview of what the starting point of what the boundaries should be in interaction. And it just came to me that there's 4, I think, situations here in the West where I think we should maybe touch on at some point. It seems like 1 is schools, the situation. 2 is the workplace. 3 is people looking to get married, and then 4 is extended family situations. At least we can maybe think of another one, at least in that case. But I think before we get that, I would like to just get to one more of a philosophical, to get to the philosophical issue. So, for example, when you say, well, because you know one of the reasons you gave for not doing it is because you might end up falling into something that you don't want to. Is that the only reason why? So, like, for example, I can see a lot of times, I know that, you know, this is not going to cross that kind of line. A woman might say, I'm not even physically attracted to this man. Or, you know, they might say, what's wrong with just harmless flirting? It's not going to go anywhere. So, like, what is it only for the purpose of not escalating to full-out steps that everyone knows is wrong?
No, it's not only for that. Jazakallah khair. But there's different sources of law in Islamic law. They're adilla shar'iyya. One of them is something called blocking the means, sadd al-dhari'a. And what that means is, if something may often or commonly lead to something problematic and forbidden, it also becomes forbidden according to Islamic law. And that's what you're talking about there, blocking the means. But sometimes some things are forbidden in themselves. Like khulwa, seclusion between the opposite genders, is forbidden in itself. It's something that's not allowed. You know, and for example, another example is nazar, is looking at the opposite gender. Now there's a difference of opinion among the scholars as to whether you could look at the opposite gender if there is no shahwa, if there's no lust and desire. You look at it just from the door of interaction, co-workers or colleagues or whatever it is. And of course, this is probably what many today follow, and it's actually the Maliki position. But there are others who even go to a further level where, you know what, you should protect your heart and what you're looking at, and you should avoid looking at things that might trigger an attraction, even if they might not. You know, and the reason why that is look, I get a lot of questions from young guys, especially. Like, you know, I find it really difficult to control my desire, and I just really, really need to get married, and life is just unbearable. And usually where I start off with is, all right, what are you doing in your free time? You know, what are you watching? Are you watching rated R films? Are you watching scenes that are forbidden? Are you listening to things that are inappropriate, always speaking about love and love relationships in a profane way? Are you going to places that are actually triggering certain feelings? You know, are you going out to, you know, certain restaurants, or even for some people it's to clubs? They might think in their mind, well, you know what, if I don't drink the alcohol, then it's okay, you know, what's the big deal? As long as I control myself, then it doesn't matter what everyone else around me is doing. But if you're going to that type of environment, then, you know, or sometimes for people, you know, in college campuses, can I go to this party or that party that has perhaps being done by people who don't really believe in my faith and don't subscribe to my values? This sometimes is something for brothers and something for sisters as well. You know, we have that reality. When I get caught up in those types of things, of course it's going to impact me as a person. So some of these things are haram in themselves because of the setting. Like, you know, very commonly what we have in, you know, in our Muslim communities is even the weddings. The weddings sometimes could be a very problematic scene when you're talking about the dress and the dress code and people dancing and a mixed gender setting with music and all of that, that's absolutely forbidden in itself, even regardless of what it leads to, because of the impact it has on my spiritual state. Those things aren't really good for me to live and experience. They're going to make me feel inevitably certain things, and perhaps, be a roadblock in the way of my spiritual experience, So those are some things to think about. Wallahu alam. Yeah. So sometimes, in other words, it's forbidden in itself, and sometimes it's to block off the means to something that is haram.
Okay, and in this case, I think what you're saying is an unneeded interaction is forbidden in and of itself, not just because they think, well, it's not going to lead to anything.
And sometimes people give themselves an illusion that their interaction is needed just because they really want it. They want to try to justify it for themselves. So what will we do at the college campus? Well, I need to study. He or she needs to study. Let's go to the library. It's a public place. We'll study at the same table, and if I have questions, maybe I can ask her or she can ask me, and so on and so forth. That's where it starts off, in that type of place, and sometimes it could be very problematic. So sometimes the shaitan doesn't start from the worst place right away, but I need to really be critical and honest with myself. Is this an interaction that is going to lead to something that's productive and healthy for me? Or is it going to be more of a test and a trial for the way I control my sexual desires? Allahu A'lam.
And I think just one more philosophical question, I think it's important here. So, again, and I think this is perfectly how you framed it in the beginning, that there's it's a broad spectrum of how to deal with this topic. And I think that when you hear a lot of lectures now, I notice, from a lot of shuyukh, it's a lot of, at least I'm noticing a tone of, we're going too far with trying to preach separation and things like that. And they, say, if you go to the time of the Sahaba and things like that, that this argument that if you go back to the time of the Sahaba, they weren't even this strict with going back and forth. And there was even a question that related to that in the questions here. And I think the second thing is you also get some responses saying, the Quran only mentions zina. If I'm not committing zina, why are you making extra rules for me? I think this just general idea of this feedback of where is they're saying where's the foundation from an actual, I guess, literary perspective.
So where's the foundation? So they weren't as strict during the time of the Sahaba? Is that what it was?
Yes. Actually, the time of the Prophet, I should say, during the time of the Prophet.
So Bismillah. So you actually, it's actually like a different planet, to be honest with you. In terms of the level of conservatism that you find during the time of the Prophet ﷺ and companions, and now, there's absolutely no comparison. In that day and age, you would find even the likes of Sayyida Aisha saying about her generation, لو كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لو رأى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ما أحدث النساء لمنعهن المساجد. She's talking about her time. That's how strict that she was in her personal life. And of course, this is not something that should be just promoted and said loosely like that. But she's telling us about her mindset, the companion's mindset, that that the Prophet ﷺ during his time, the women companions, when they would go out to prayer, they would hardly be known because they would be covering themselves fully. The Sayyida Aisha said that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when he saw that there was heavy interaction, that he said, we will specify a door for the women, to avoid excess interaction. So no, that's absolutely, not at all. You would not find, the reality that we have today in terms of idhar az-zina, and sometimes even wearing hijab in a way, or wearing dress in a way, even for brothers, that is so revealing that it's as though it's not hijab or dress at all. No, that's a total misconception. If you're talking about people who are in such conservatively dressed and very much limited in their interactions with the opposite gender, how are you going to compare that to our reality where society as a whole is actually just pushing out towards this? It's not just zina that Islam prohibited. No, not at all. It prohibited khulwa. It prohibited physical contact, right? And then you find in the interactions between the women companions and the men companions, you'll never ever find inappropriate interactions where it's just like, okay, we're friends and we're hanging out and we're going to go here or we're going to go there. So I really don't know where those words are coming from. Allah Alam.
Yeah, I didn't.
Now here, I understand one thing though. I do understand, and I understand this argument. Do we want to be extremely conservative? Is there a problem when, in our normal lives, we're dealing with the opposite gender at every level, and then when it comes to our communities, we're completely locked off, and we don't allow anything that ends up even affecting people's opportunities for marriage? Sometimes it makes it very difficult for people to find the right spouse because of such extreme measures that some communities, I don't think ours really, to be honest with you, take in terms of stopping interaction between the genders. I would say I understand that argument, and there is some merit to that in a certain context, right?
Right. I guess I would think my instinct is in the West too. It's like, if you really look at the way things are going, and as far as things are only getting worse and worse, as far as that, and, you're flooded by the Western society, totally pumping the other ideas down. So if anything, I mean, the messages should be very strongly against. Be careful here. You're in very dangerous ground. There should be my instinct should be like there shouldn't be any sort of preaching of, oh no, things are okay. You should be very, very careful because it's such a dangerous world that we're living in right now that it's really.
And I guess society as a whole is even teaching us this, by the way. When you look at it from a standpoint that lacks experience, you might, be frustrated. Why these boundaries? Why these restrictions? But when you look at the stories and what's happening in people's lives, then you'll realize the wisdom behind Sharia. When you look at greater society and all of the cases of sexual harassment and sexual assault that's being reported in the workplace, being reported in school, the exploitation of women to the highest degree, you'll realize why there's wisdom behind Sharia. When you look at what's happening, this is exactly what's happening. How many times has a woman in her workplace complained about her boss or one of her colleagues crossing their bounds with her because we communicated so much and we got so comfortable with each other, he made certain movements and advances to me that I really wasn't accepting of. And it happened against my will. And you have those, why do you think you have the Me Too movement? Why do you think you have the Me Too movement? You guys know the Me Too movement, right? Everyone knows the Me Too movement. You probably should if you're following what's going on in the news. You have the Me Too movement for a really good reason. Because women now are speaking out against all of the cases of sexual harassment, and sometimes it goes a little too far. Sometimes it becomes like a form of neo-Nazism. But sometimes it's very much justified. It's justified where you find this because there's no adherence to any sense of boundaries between the genders, right?
Right. And to me, I thought the Me Too movement, just as a side note, was one of the greatest evidences for the Islamic Sharia in the first place, because it really exposed the true nature. Everyone says, oh, in the West, we don't have to do these kinds of restrictions you guys do because we can control ourselves and all that. And in reality, especially in the higher power workplaces and all that, this is the reality of what really goes on, right? So.
Yeah, I have, again, like when you deal with counseling and you'll sit with conflicts between people, I have situations of people, sometimes husband or wife crossing the boundary and dealing with someone else to the extent that it ruined the marriage. Or sometimes things getting too comfortable with extended family that it caused such damage with the extended family because certain boundaries were crossed. Extended family, we're talking about the relations between that. That happens, and we have too many cases, where our brothers and sisters, young brothers and sisters, end up falling into zina and fornication. Too many cases of that. Those things happen behind the scenes. People don't know about them. So many sisters have to deal with that. I made a mistake, I repented to Allah, now I'm going to get married, and I'm worried that it's going to come up in some way or another. Should I tell someone who asks for my hand that I was in an illicit relationship before? That's the dilemma for many of our sisters, and sometimes our brothers too. They have double lives where, on the outside, they appear to be in one way, but in their own personal life, they might live a life of going to clubs and going out with girls, and they might have had multiple girlfriends. And we're talking about some people who are in the spheres and circles of the masajid. We're not talking about people who have never once entered a mosque before. We're talking about people who are from semi-religious families. This is the reality, and we need to be honest with that reality. And of course, someone who commits a major sin like zina doesn't mean that there's no hope for them. No, of course not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the most awe-inspiring verse in the Quran, it's in Surah Al-Zumar. You guys need to know this verse, the most awe-inspiring verse. It gives a lot of hope for people who've made a lot of big mistakes. It says, قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. O my servants who've transgressed against their souls, don't despair from Allah's mercy. Allah forgives all sins. So really that's the thing that we should also keep in mind here. I don't think it's that these ideas that at least we're presenting here are way too conservative. I really think that these ideas that are presented in our deen are actually for the betterment of society. And sometimes when people don't realize that and they make mistakes, Allah gives them opportunity after opportunity to come back. Come back, it's okay. Even if you cross those boundaries, you could fix it. Allahu A'lam.
So there was a question or two about that as well. Okay, like I said, I think honestly most of the questions could go into those 4 categories of things. So let me know what you think, but I think maybe it would be smart then if we touch on these 4 things. We said school, work, blah, blah, blah. Do you want to go to that?
Sure.
Okay.
There is one thing here, though, because
Sure.
it relates to that fornication I wanted to address. It says here, if someone commits zina, but then repents and changes their lifestyle, will their past affect their future relationships? I would say, inshallah, no. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is oft forgiving. And Allah is Ar-Rahim. He is At-Tawwab. He is the most merciful. He is the oft repentant upon His servants. If someone committed that, then you should conceal it to the best of your ability. That's not something you should publicize. Be very careful about who you share that type of information with. If you've committed that and you need advice, seek advice from a mentor on how you should deal with marriage and your future relationships if that's your situation. There's no sense in ruining a future relationship by exposing some of your past deeds. Everyone has a sinful past, and sometimes one of the worst mistakes someone could do is share with their fiancé or their husband or their wife some of the sins of their past that'll cause a great deal of mistrust. There's of course a way to handle this type of situation, but it will cause a great deal of mistrust, and sometimes it'll be too difficult to overcome that if you share that type of sensitive information with your spouse. So you should be very careful with that. That's what I would say to that question. Inshallah, Allah will repent, but make sure that you keep that information as private as possible.
So do you want to go into that order like I said, or do you want me to read specific? Okay, so we'll do that. So I think the school one is an important one. I think especially for the parents and how they want to think about it. So especially if they're going to public school here in the West, and it's very mixed, and the environment. And I went to public school here in the West, so I know it's the environment is very social, and it's promoted. It's promoted by the teachers. It's promoted by everything. Everything is very social in that whole atmosphere. So I think and I know that one of the arguments it highlights, I think, if for no other reason alone, that seems like, to me at least, it seems like a reason that parents should really do everything they can to try to put their kids in Islamic school, and they can for that reason alone. And, you know, I mean, I think one of the reasons sometimes people, they say, oh, well, I think the public schools might be better education or something like that, which is, I can tell you, going to public school personally, it's not. But could you give some comments on, you know, if how if that issue alone, should be how parents should look at that about putting their kids in public school, where they know that they're going to be putting their 14-year-old girl or 14-year-old boy, they're going to be mixing, they're not going to have the self-control to you know, have boundaries. Maybe they will, inshallah, but I guess if you want to touch on that. And I think that's where it starts too. That's where just the normalization of this whole interaction thing starts.
Well, look, you know, when it comes to the educational system, it's always going to be a challenge. Even whether you put them in public school or in an Islamic school, there's always going to be an element of challenge. Even when you, do homeschooling for them, and when they grow up, they go to college, there's always going to be a challenge. Someone who is not properly founded in their principles and their beliefs and their values will always struggle when it comes to these types of issues where society is pushing one way and I need to sort of stand my ground and push the other. You're always going to face this problem. Now, of course, you'll face it with greater intensity in certain situations perhaps, but nonetheless, I think the most important thing for parents and, you know, for all of us really to try to do is to really deeply root faith within the heart. I need to start living my Islam meaningfully. I can't do it ritually. I can't just do it outwardly. I just doing my prayers and attending the masjid for Ramadan and fasting, and that's it. And no, that's not going to work, because I'm always going to be susceptible to being tested. Right? And I need to strengthen myself spiritually and prepare myself for that. You know, if I'm not strong in my values, I will not be able to stand my ground when trials come my way, whether it's this type of trial or another type of trial, to be honest with you. So I think that's what it is, because for many people it's not practical to put your children in Islamic school unless you have a very high income. And even if you put them in Islamic school, there's too many cases coming out of our Islamic schools where certain boundaries are compromised between the genders. So it's going to happen regardless if you don't found someone upon solid faith and commitment to Allah and commitment to what's right. So that's what how I would answer that question. Allahu a'lam.
Okay, exactly. Okay. And I think then I guess the work question is an important one. So the need question, I think, becomes interesting there, because, I mean, I guess just to even start, but I mean, there's a lot of jobs where, you know, you can be gender separated and things like that. But let's say, for example, for a woman who does not need to work, if there's not a need, but if she was going to go to work, it's going to cause increased interaction with men. And you know, this is obviously this is a widely discussed topic, I think, right? About how they should look at that.
Look, you know, what does it mean that she doesn't need to work? You know, that's in our day and age, even working not for income but for keeping yourself busy or for keeping yourself healthy is something that's really important. You know, when people, you know, when they reach older age, some of them choose to continue working even after retirement because it's really important for me to have something that fills my schedule, you know. So, you know, you're going to find different shades of gray where people will say, oh, I don't want my spouse in this type of job or that type of spouse. You know, it's really the whole ideal here is husband and wife, they should not make their marriage relationship complicated. They should be open to reasoning and to reach shared decisions on certain things. There's no clear black and white here in terms of Islam. Does a woman have the right to work? Yeah, she does, as long as she's, you know, as other duties are being fulfilled. Just as she has her duties, her husband has his duties. Just as long as duties are being fulfilled, it's a right to work, because having your own personal income might help you, you know. We have too many situations where I'll tell you, Akhi Ahmed, where you know, perhaps a woman might dedicate 20, 30, or 40 years of her life to serving the home, and then it ends up in divorce, and the nastiest side of a human being might appear, where her husband will just turn his back and leave her with 5 kids. I've seen those types of situations where the sister dedicated her life to the home and she never finished her education and she never saved money, and her husband just left her and the kids, and she needs to go get charity from here or charity from there. So working in itself is a need. Now, the details of that, we always advise couples reach a consensus. Make it a shared decision. Don't make it something, oh, I'm going to do this against you, whether you like it or not. Or you're never going to do this, or else this or that. No, it just needs to be a consensus. That's the best way to live your marriage. Wallahu alam.
I mean, I guess just to follow up on that too a little bit with the need and that, because I know, is there a hadith, and I remember, if there's not a hadith, correct me this, but is there something that there's a hadith process that there will come a time when, I mean, so I guess this issue does come up a lot, right, that a woman gets put in a difficult situation where you said her husband could divorce her and she's in a stuck situation, so that in itself gives a motivation that a woman could work. I want to have, some protection and some security in my back pocket for survival purposes. I guess maybe you could even just call that a need in itself, but is there a hadith about there will come a time when a woman will go out to work for love of dunya and leave her family? And it's a kind of I guess you can call it one of the end times ones. I don't remember if it was specifically.
I don't remember this hadith.
There's no hadith about this at all.
I don't remember.
Okay.
Okay. Don't guess hadiths.
Okay.
So you want to ask something, Akhi Ahmed? Go ahead. So the question was, how should we conduct ourselves on social media? You mean with the opposite gender? Look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَقُلْنَا قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا, and say an accepted, known speech, something that's not beyond the boundaries of decency. It's a general statement here, but it gives us some guidance. That guidance is, when it comes to interacting with the opposite gender, if it's kind, it's casual, courteous, and it's not excessive, and it's not obscene or profane or something like that, this does not fall into the realm of haram. However, if it becomes excessive, then it could fall into the realm of shubha and gray area. So you should be careful of that if it becomes excessive. But sometimes people get a little bit petty and silly with these types of things. That, if I see a guy putting a like for one of my wife's posts, then I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. That's silly. That's silly. Someone who thinks like that is petty. If I see a girl on my husband's social media account, then I'm going to raise hell. But when it comes, sometimes do people cross the lines in social media when it comes to, posting images of themselves and, beautifying themselves for the public, guy or girl. Sometimes it's guys doing this too. Or excessively commenting on each other's appearance, commenting on appearance, or private messages through Facebook Messenger and this and that. All that stuff leads down to the road of controversy. If it just becomes chatting for the sake of chatting, people know themselves. But in insanu ala, there's a good thing here. If they're a person of conscience, Allah tells them, بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا وَلَوْ أَلْقَى مَعَاذِيرًا. Everyone is a witness over themselves, even if they're going to give their excuses. If I'm just deciding to message Sister Fulana just to see how she's doing, and I'm saying, I just want to be kind and courteous. So how are you doing? How was your weekend? How was this and that? We're having a nice casual conversation. No, that type of person needs to be told, taqillah, don't do that. You don't need to do that. That's where we go back to need, right? What's the purpose of this conversation? Is it just for the purpose of chit-chatting? Then that's something you really shouldn't do, because it could lead to something problematic. But again, when it comes to those other details, there's also an extreme thing here when it comes to like extreme jealousy or extreme control. If I see my wife even looking the direction of men or responding to salam. Some people go extreme to that. My wife, if she says salam to another guy, then I'm going to do this and that. that stuff doesn't really have a place in our deen. So that's something really important to keep in mind. Wallahu alam. There's a lot of questions here. I don't know if you want to go through some of them.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the marriage one was going to be the next one. Just real quick on the social media ones. Like one of the big ones, like, so for example, Instagram, there's really, the primary purpose is pictures, right? And I would, most of them are pictures of themselves. And you have an option, for example, to just not have it public and not have certain friends. So is it normal, and it's happening a lot, is it, normal and okay that people are essentially posting pictures of themselves and have many non-mahram friends that are friends, or should they be, is that I'll just leave it there.
Look, I think social media culture in general is very toxic. It's, a lot of it's a bunch of nonsense. I got this cool smoothie, or I'm on this nice mountain, or this nice park, and I start posing for the camera and I need the whole world to see it. All of this stuff is a bunch of nonsense. A lot of it falls into diseases of the heart, in terms of showing off, and a lot of it falls into inappropriate stuff in terms of exposing your blessings. A lot of people fall into a lot of problems because of social media. I really think in general, away from this issue, social media is only useful when it's used for something that's constructive on a personal level. When it comes to sharing the trivial details of your day-to-day, I would say that, unfortunately, social media has programmed us in a very toxic way. That I can't really enjoy something unless the whole world knows about it. And, I really think that if we think about that, it's really important, because when you go in nature, sometimes people, they're programmed to operate in that way. I can't enjoy this walk in nature unless the first thing I do is a picture here and a picture there and another picture there, and it takes away from the experience of life, So I would say if someone chooses for themselves to limit their social media, especially when you're talking about these other things. So Facebook, you have actually posting. Instagram, you're saying it's all pictures or
It's just pictures, yeah. I mean, some people put pictures of like food and stuff, but I mean, the majority of it is people, yeah, of the, yeah.
Allah yafina.
Yeah, okay, so if you want to get to the marriage ones, I mean, I could read them out, but they're essentially all the same thing about the idea of the boundaries when they're talking to someone. Before getting married. So for example, I've talked to someone I know, we want to get married, but we're not ready financially yet. Is it okay for us to keep talking and things like that? Or let's say that, is it okay that we started in a haram way, but we're, going to get married, and how that, so it's all this kind of thing about these lines before.
I really think that whenever someone's going to consider the journey of marriage, it's really good for them to get advice from a mentor, someone they trust, a family member, a teacher, someone that they could go to for real, honest advice. Because sometimes you get like that first thing that you said, sometimes it's a really big doorway from the shaitan. Oh, we're really interested in each other, but we don't have the means yet. So we're deciding to communicate with each other in secrecy for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years until we save up money, and then maybe he'll come and ask for my hand. That is utter nonsense. Are you kidding me? Are you going to talk in secrecy for 2, 3, 4 years until you could actually get married? That happens. It's and it's a big trap from the shaitan. There's no way, brothers and sisters, that you could talk to someone for 2, 3, 4 years through messages and through calls here and there and not develop an emotional attachment to that human being. There's no way. So to do that before you're actually ready for marriage is absolute, you're setting yourself up for a world of pain. And too many people have fell into that. I'm telling you that from a place of experience, seeing people going down the road of marriage in this manner, it's not a healthy thing at all. If you're not ready for marriage and you can't really ask for a girl, brother, then just put your head down, focus, make a lot of dua, fast Mondays and Thursdays, finish your career, and then when you're ready, go ask for the sister. Well, she might get married. I want her to wait for me in time. I don't want to say what I want to say. She might get married.
You can't have both ways.
Then she's not your nasib. Yeah. She's not written for you if she's going to get married, right? So, and the same thing with that. Sisters, I really strongly advise, if you know, if you're ever in that situation where a brother's telling you, I'm really interested, but I just don't have enough money and I finished school in 2 years, ومش عارف إيه, don't fall prey to your emotions. Tell him, مع كل احترام, مع السلامة, come back when you're ready. All right?
Right. And just one follow-up because they're...
Huh?
I was going to ask that follow-up because there's a question there. I think it's important about. She asked about what about if the parents. So someone says, and our parents know and they're okay with it. But let's say they're not with the parents when they're hanging out.
So here, I'll tell you this. Even if the parents know, you know, one of the worst things you could choose to do is to have long engagements. I'm telling you, 9 out of 10 times they fall on their faces. Long engagements that last for 3, 4, 5 years, ومش عارف إيه, these usually don't work out. Maybe like 1 in 10 or 1 in 100 might work out. But even if you tell the parents sometimes, all right, what are you going to do? You can't. Yeah. If you control the relationship, if you have 2, 3, 4 years, I'm telling you, based on experience, I tell you, nasihatan, yani, prepare yourself for marriage before you actually start having the discussion. I know sometimes you're in a situation where you have an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old, 20-year-old, they have no patience. So you want to tell them, all right, let's organize it and do it in halal because you're afraid they're going to do it in haram, right? Sometimes you're in this type of situation. But it's really, really important. I'm advising the young people, don't pursue marriage until you're actually ready for it. And those long-term things, usually, very often, they lead to a lot of problems. If someone, like, okay, let's take it to halal and haram. If someone wants to do that, and their parents are aware, and they actually formalize it in an engagement, khutuba, if it's just a khutuba, meaning there's no katb kitab, they're still foreign to each other. The fatal mistake that happens, it's going to be okay as long as they keep the relationship serious. But the fatal mistake is it's so hard to keep it serious. You could meet a person 1 time, 2 times, 5 times, 7 times, but if you're talking with this person multiple times a week for a few years, what are you going to talk about that's going to be serious? It's going to be joking, expression of love. I love you, you love me, let's get together. And you know, it's going to be silliness. That's what it's going to lead to. Because fatrat al-khutuba, sometimes people have a misconception. Oh, we're going to get married, so we start going out here and going out there. We'll go out for walks here, and we'll go to the movies there, and we'll go out for dinner there, and we'll put someone in the chaperone. We'll send with them a little kid who's going to stay like somewhere hidden in the back so we could have fun. This is, the whole idea is you don't want emotional attachment to build now, because it might not work out. And if it doesn't work out, then you're talking about a lot of pain. People that fall into years of depression because of these types of things. It doesn't work out. I've been in this relationship for 3 years and it came crashing down, and fighting, and then we went our separate ways, and what happens? A lot of nadam, a lot of hasra, I don't want to get married anymore. And then you'll find the person spends 3, 4, 5 years and after that until they think of getting married. So there's too many stories like this, wallahu a'lam.
All right. I don't know how much time we have, so at the very least...
10 minutes.
Okay, so at the very least, let's go do the cousins one. There's a lot of it. And even actually, this is a question for me. I just give you the first time I think I'm going to come from a more liberal view than the... Anyway, so... like for example, the cousins, yeah, like I know my cousins, I grew up with them, first cousins, right, and I know them, so like if I go back to visit them, I would feel like I would feel very comfortable being close around them, frankly, I feel like I don't even look at them that way because we grew up together that way, right, and I would almost be, it would be difficult for me to feel like I would have to make a restriction against seeing my cousin as my family that I grew up, right, and I think there's a question about that, what are the lines with the cousins?
The same lines with other people. When you're talking about, there can't be any physical contact. Of course, when you're talking about cousins, maybe perhaps the level of communication might be more detailed because you're familiar with each other. She's the daughter of my uncle or my aunt or mash'arife. We could perhaps have some type of respectable conversations, not in khalwa, right? Not in khalwa, casual, courteous, and within certain boundaries. Perhaps you might say that the boundaries might be a little bit less than someone who's an absolute foreigner, but you can't be in private conversations. You can't come into physical contact. Some people do that. They'll shake hands, they'll hug, if she's not your mahram, you can't do that, right? It's not la yajuz, even if she's a relative. But can you have kind and courteous conversations? Yeah, you can.
Yes, for example, I guess, yeah, I wouldn't, just as an example, I guess, like, yes, like it would be normal, even me and my cousins, like they wouldn't do physical contact, and I don't think they would even hang out alone one-on-one, but within a group, it would be, very laughy, very
Yeah.
like the way it would be with my aunts and uncles or something. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel much different as far as that level of non-seriousness, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the norm for a lot of people, right?
Yeah,
So what do you,
yeah. Well, if it's in the presence of your aunts and uncles or مشارفة and it's not like a private conversation, that's very much different. That's very different, than being alone by yourself, right? So
Okay.
that's where it becomes more problematic. There's one here. I don't know if you saw it, but when two are talking for the sake of marriage with parents' permission, after how long should they do the engagement, in your opinion? Is going over 6 months of talking okay? Would it make things worse? There's no real clear-cut answer for this type of thing, like a certain time frame. But each situation is different, and in general, what you're looking for is to avoid emotional attachment during fatrat al-khutuba. That should be left for after katb kitab. Some people do 6 months, 8 months, 1 year. I would say the more you get past 1 year, the more unreasonable it becomes, because it becomes very difficult to maintain certain things with that. Wallahu alam. Questions?
I did have,
Do any
next
people
one.
have questions they'd like to ask directly? Yeah. We have a few minutes left. Any direct questions you'd like to ask about anything relating to this subject, gender interaction? Or comments. If you have comments and you're brave enough to make them, feel free. تفضل حج. Mm. Ya salam. Ya salam. Ya salam. Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair, Hajj. So I guess these are nice concluding words of advice from Hajj Anis. He's saying he was married for 52 years, and the reason why so far, inshallah, many more, bidnillah. Rabbna yabarik for umrak, inshallah. 52 years, and the reason why he was able to do that was because there's a high level of respect between him and his wife. And once respect is lost between any two pursuing to build anything with each other, then it'll go downhill from there. And unfortunately, Hajj, jazakallah khair, but sometimes respect is lost from day one, even before they're engaged. Today, you'll find that there's expectations and there's fights over trivial things, and and it's absolutely insane. Sometimes you'll find fighting before even the khutubah. And it often it causes a lot of toxicity. So we should be very careful from this. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all and give us guidance and in dealing with the opposite gender. You want to say anything in the end, Hajj? Mm. Yeah. Jazakallah khair, Hajj. Barakallah feek.
Over there.
There's one more. Okay, last question and we'll conclude because we have to stand for salah. Go ahead. Yeah. So this is a really good question, and we'll conclude with this question. When it comes to sharing your past with someone you're considering marrying, is that sort of like hiding the truth or not being very truthful if you don't share with them everything, full disclosure? The answer to this, people, it's like sort of a tricky situation, sister, because imagine if someone was to share their sins with every person they were to consider for marriage, brother or sister. You know, if you've done such atrocious things, or awful things, kaba'ir, that many people won't accept and it'll cause certain feelings inside, then you might be looking at sharing this same story 20 times, 30 times over until you get married, and perhaps after just 1 or 2 times of sharing it, you'll find the whole community will find out, oh, beware of fulan or beware of fulana because they did X, Y, and Z. And you're going to find the story is going to change 10 times over as it's shared from person to person. And every person's going to tell another person, hey, you know what I found out? Please don't share with anybody. I'm only telling you. And they'll share with you private details about a brother or sister. And then that person will say, hey, I heard this, please don't share it with anybody else. And each person shares it with one person, and the whole community finds out on that. So what do? So if you're that type of person who has a sketchy past, you've done certain things, you really regret them, you repented to Allah Azza wa Jal from them, what should you do now? You should look at the person coming to ask for you, if you're a sister, or the person you're asking for, if you're a brother. You could bring up in indirect ways things to find out, is this the type of person who's adamant about knowing everything about you? Or is this the type of person who realizes that everyone has their past and I just want to build a future with you? There's people that are different types, right? Some people will say, hey, you know what? I know that I've done things perhaps and you've done things perhaps. Let's just build a new life with each other. No questions asked. That's the type of situation that a brother or sister with a sketchy past would be looking for. But if they're finding a brother coming to ask and he starts asking intrusive questions, were you ever in a relationship with another guy? Did you ever do this? Did you ever do that? Then she should never answer that type of question. She should keep it general, let the conversation end, and in the end say, it looks like it's not going to work out. Or the parents will say it on your behalf, mafishi nasib or something like that. But should you share your sins publicly for that purpose? No, don't do that. But look for that type of situation, wallahu alam. And now it's time for salah.
Okay, I was going to say, someone asked the question, I feel like a 30-second response, because I think it gets to the root of a lot of the problem with the community. When that's about the idea of engagement not being a personal attachment. They ask, what's the purpose of the Fatiha if you're not supposed to create an emotional attachment? And they say, like, how can someone know if they're willing to have a ketb kitab with a person if they don't create that emotional attachment?
That's not a 30-second question.
Okay,
that needs explanation. Jazakallah khair. Subhanak Allahumma bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wal 'asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina 'amilu salihat wa sahhahu sabr. Inshallah, we'll get prepared for salah. If we can move the boundary towards